Major protest against plans to house hundreds of asylum seekers at a military base. People demonstrated in Crowborough in East Sussex earlier today. Well, the site has capacity to house 540 men. Army cadets had used the training camp but moved out earlier this week.
Britain. The land of stiff upper lips, orderly queues, and now, apparently, state-sponsored demographic engineering. Just picture the scene. You're a 70-year-old grandmother who's paid taxes in the same village for 7 decades, and suddenly, you're told that your new neighbors, unvetted, single males arriving via the channel, will be protected by armed police while you face arrest for the heinous crime of rudely observing the situation. It's what we call in politics a two-tier justice system, where the only thing crashing faster than your house price is the government's credibility. Welcome to the new countryside. If you're watching this, you're one of the 98% who haven't subscribed yet. Click subscribe and let's get into the real story. What we are witnessing is no longer a civil disagreement, it's a full-blown national fracture. The polite pleas are over. Across 68 distinct groups nationwide, the mood has curdled into open defiance, reflected by a shocking 43% surge in recorded public disorder incidents. In response, trust in the sitting government has plummeted by nearly a third. The polite facade is gone, replaced by masked indignation. The pressure cooker finally blew when Prime Minister Starmer's administration, citing a massive overload of the nation's hotel infrastructure, announced their audacious plan. They would begin requisitioning vast tracts of military territory, filling former barracks and training grounds with undocumented arrivals, primarily young men from Africa and the Middle East. The precise figures were deliberately obfuscated, kept hazy to avoid detonating a massive public panic just before the holiday season. Yet, the opposition was quick to brandish its own explosive estimates, a projected movement of up to 20,000 individuals into these sites. Their accusation? That Starmer was presiding over nothing less than the systemic capitulation of British sovereignty, accusing the government of surrendering the country without firing a shot. The public's red line was violently crossed at the infamous Crowborough base. 600 dedicated young cadets, Britain's future elite forces, were unceremoniously evicted from their training quarters to clear the space for the new, unelected residents. This blatant act of prioritizing new arrivals over dedicated service personnel sparked instant, raw outrage. Within minutes, the vicinity was swarming with mobs, their faces hidden behind cloth, driven by a fury that had been simmering for months. The violence was immediate. 2 police vehicles were utterly gutted. 80 seconds into the national broadcast covering the unrest, the screen cut to black, an official technical fault, but on the ground, the narrative was one of utter, unbridled chaos. The logistical logjam had already swallowed 3-star hotels across the country, creating a bizarre contrast, thousands of new arrivals enjoying state-funded room and board, while veterans who fought for the very ground they stand on continue to sleep rough in the freezing cold. Now, historic military estates, hallowed ground once home to paratroopers and shock regiments, are being converted into accommodation blocks for waves of people who arrived via small boats. The crisis is no longer an abstract problem confined to the anonymity of distant city centers. It's a physical siege. Local communities, overwhelmed and under-consulted, are watching police forces retreat, and essential local services warn that they are facing an immediate and non-recoverable collapse. Yet, in the face of this social trauma, Starmer's official line remains unmoved. This is a necessary and unavoidable administrative measure. It took less than 2 hours for the village-level outrage to ignite the major metropolitan areas. From the halls of London to the streets of Belfast, crowds coalesced, their chant clear and unified: Starmer surrendered Britain, demanding the instantaneous disbandment of Parliament itself. 36 initial arrests were made, a figure that would prove tragically modest. The masked elements of the crowd elevated the conflict, launching fireworks directly into police lines and hurling glass bottles. Simultaneously, reports of arson began filtering in, with random fires breaking out at 14 different accommodation hotels. At 3 primary migration processing centres, police were forced to escalate their defence, deploying armoured riot vans and hastily constructing emergency-level barricades. Meanwhile, in the quiet villages now dealing with alarming spikes in shoplifting and public harassment, a more insidious element of the official response emerged. Local constabularies were reportedly refusing to record the background or religious affiliations of perpetrators, using the official justification of avoiding offence. The consequences of this policy were chillingly swift and financially devastating. The moment a military base is officially earmarked for migrant housing, the surrounding property becomes a toxic asset, with estate agents reporting house value collapses of anywhere from 20 to a staggering 40%. By nightfall, the street violence had surged by 16%, culminating in 121 people being hospitalized from both sides of the conflict. The protesters branded the government's approach as a form of two-tier justice. This isn't just about housing, it's about hierarchy. The protesters' central, damning charge was simple, that a lifetime resident, a grandmother who spent 70 years paying into the system, can face arrest for hate speech if she dares speak harshly about her new, state-protected neighbours. Conversely, police platoons are deployed, not to maintain order in the community, but to form an iron ring perimeter, standing guard to protect the incoming asylum seekers from the very citizens who fund their wages. The terrifying reality of the breakdown was captured in a single, chilling message crackling over a police radio in South Birmingham: Sector 16 is totally lost. They stopped chanting and started storming. In Northern Ireland, riot squads were forced into a violent, organised counter-offensive, with witnesses reporting over 80 masked factions clashing directly with the police front lines. And then, the fuse was lit under the entire political edifice. A staggering leak surfaced online, allegedly exposing Starmer's true internal political strategy. Online commentators immediately seized on the documents, branding them as the Prime Minister's scorched earth strategy. The documents appeared to reveal a deliberate and calculated pattern. The Labour administration was specifically targeting traditionally conservative rural heartlands for the mass placement of migrants. The reported, long-term political objective was to intentionally, permanently alter the district's demographic makeup by settling thousands of young, predominantly male arrivals from Africa and the Middle East into these isolated villages. The realization exploded across social media comment sections. The strategy was a slow, methodical poison pill. In 5 to 8 years, a historically reliable conservative stronghold would be transformed into a multicultural district, statistically engineered to vote Labour. This immediately threw a forgotten campaign promise back into the spotlight, Starmer's own admission that to fully realise his vision for a new Britain, he would require 10 consecutive years in power. This leak, whether official or not, was the ultimate breaking point. Without waiting for any official denial or comment, the crowds massed in Parliament Square, their demands unified: resignation. They accused Starmer of the ultimate political hypocrisy, promising control while implementing a policy of electoral manipulation. And Starmer's response? The same, infuriatingly cold, technical excuse: it is a necessary cost-saving measure. He issued a curt public demand for the immediate cessation of the unrest, threatening severe consequences for all involved in the rioting. Meanwhile, the consequences of the policy were being dealt with on the ground by private citizens. Along the Kent coastline, black-clad, unauthorized groups were spotted actively intercepting small boats, turning back more than 120 arrivals in a single 6-hour window. "We're taking the situation into our own hands," one member declared in a TikTok clip that amassed 8.2 million views in a day. The national media universally vilified them as far-right extremists, while the local residents, desperate and abandoned, simply described them as patriots. This entire crisis, the public now understood, was no accident of poor logistics. It was not mere bad planning. It was the calculated outcome of a political leadership that had chosen to weaponize the migration system itself, a deliberate act to punish political opponents by prioritizing a decade-long plan to manufacture a new, compliant electorate over the immediate safety and stability of existing communities. Regional polling confirmed the public's darkest suspicions. A staggering 76% believed their towns were being intentionally targeted for political vengeance. 64% felt that the police had decisively prioritized the protection of government facilities over the protection of taxpayers. 59% pinned the blame directly on Starmer for the ongoing, visible destruction of their rural property values and community cohesion. And a gut-wrenching 2 million residents in the affected shires reported feeling like absolute strangers in their own villages. Then, in a theatrical twist, Kier Starmer made an unexpected statement. He announced that the former military bases were being used to house migrants under stricter accommodation rules. The justification? We promised a tough approach to illegal arrivals. We are enforcing it. Within 2 hours, public opinion had fractured completely. On one side, migrant rights groups were up in arms, arguing that the reproposed barracks were too harsh, calling the segregated military facilities an unacceptable form of accommodation. On the other, critics countered that the entire policy, placing newcomers on military bases, was the political equivalent of surrendering Britain without a shot fired. In his attempt to appeal to both sides of the argument, the Prime Minister successfully satisfied neither. The reality on the ground was far uglier than the political spin. Rural medical practices described an impossible, unsafe saturation level. In a truly alarming revelation, a confidential briefing leaked from the Ministry of Defence was found to use the administrative term, infrastructure limits breached. In bureaucratic code, this is the official designation for a total and irrecoverable loss of operational control, a warning the villagers instinctively felt in their bones. The same medical practices were now collapsing under the strain. In quiet, historic parishes like Wethersfield, Scampton, and Crowborough, locals were witnessing their local heritage being systematically dismantled faster than the press could even report the developments. Historic barracks, once the proud home to Britain's elite troops, were now basic accommodation blocks for thousands of unvetted individuals who arrived illegally by boat. Cadet training grounds, instead of producing the nation's next generation of soldiers, had been immediately requisitioned as vast processing centers to handle the human overflow from the city hotels. The financial damage of this supposed cost-saving measure concurrently accelerated. The cost to retrofit these dilapidated, isolated sites to install security, heating, and services has now spiraled to match the hotel bills they were originally intended to replace, obliterating any promise of taxpayer savings. Factor in the eye-watering private security contracts, the importation of heated tents, the complex logistics, and the verified collapse of local housing markets, and the true, economic hit to these specific regions is incalculable. For rural economies already teetering on the financial brink, this isn't merely pressure, it's an engineered, targeted financial ruin. Even moderate, non-partisan observers began asking the obvious question, why are we consistently prioritizing foreign nationals over our own veterans sleeping rough on the streets? Ask the evicted cadets. Ask the families whose life savings are tied up in houses whose values plummeted by 40% overnight. Ask the local insurers who are hiking premiums due to the new high-risk neighbors. The core reality is stark. These quaint villages were never built, socially or physically, to absorb thousands of individuals with zero connection to the area, many of whom have completely different cultural norms. When the local outrage predictably exploded, every village constable looked to headquarters for the permission to protect the residents who pay their salary. That permission was explicitly and unequivocally denied. Instead, area commanders received a chilling directive, one that locals correctly describe as a profound betrayal of their tax money: prioritize the facility, shield the asylum seekers. The term hate speech became the weaponized tool used to silence a 70-year-old grandmother who has lived there for decades, while the men illegally arriving are shielded from even the slightest criticism. The authorities were not arresting vocal locals because they posed a threat to public safety. They arrested them because Starmer's government is actively enforcing a political, demographic transformation. Multiple high-level sources from within the administration have confirmed the same insidious strategy. Every enforcement action is now calculated solely to suppress opposition to the demographic shift. It makes no difference if house prices crash by 40%, it makes no difference if insurance premiums skyrocket, and it makes no difference if women feel unsafe walking past the new razor wire perimeters. Westminster's priority is not rural safety, it is the 10-year consolidation of Labour power. Labour strategists, it seems, have become so laser-focused on their scorched earth policy that they would willingly sacrifice the safety and stability of the countryside if it means guaranteeing the demise of Conservative voter strongholds. The United Kingdom has now reached a truly unbelievable state. It is the only nation on earth where police units are strategically deployed not to catch the border breakers, but to protect them from the very citizens who pay their wages. The cabinet had access to alarming, unvarnished data from sites like Wethersfield, warning them in plain text of rising shoplifting incidents, increased harassment of young girls, and the total, terminal erosion of community trust. Every single briefing note highlighted the immense social risks of placing thousands of young, single men in isolated, female-dominated villages. Starmer disregarded every single one of them. Analysts now openly suggest the Prime Minister personally authorized the expansion precisely because it perfectly aligns with the long-term, ideological goal of demographic engineering and electoral realignment. Meanwhile, British families see their entire life savings wiped out, veterans continue to sleep in the freezing cold, and villagers are simply told to accept their new reality. A government that replaces its own population is a government that has effectively declared war on its own heritage. This is the grim reality of how a culture loses its footing. It does not happen in a single, dramatic military defeat, it happens in hundreds of silent, incremental evictions, a psychological and economic war of attrition. Downing Street can attempt to bury the crime statistics. Starmer can theoretically classify the full list of future base locations. But the villages felt the profound betrayal this week. The countryside is now being managed by technocrats who view rural heritage and tradition as nothing more than a logistical inconvenience. Consider the grotesque irony: if these historic sites were being restored for the thousands of British veterans currently sleeping in doorways, the necessary funding would be immediately deemed impossible by the Treasury. But because the occupants are unvetted arrivals from the Channel, the budgets are seemingly unlimited, and the local youth are simultaneously locked out of the facilities and the resources. This is the precise moment a government stops protecting its past and starts engineering a fundamentally different future. This policy is not just housing administration, it is a revelation. It is a clear signal that the quiet lanes and market towns no longer belong to the families who tended them, paid their taxes, and respected the law, but instead to a manufactured demographic shift that this administration adamantly refuses to halt. That scorched earth strategy is not a conspiracy theory, it is the new national reality. Local small business owners are now reporting that their delivery vans are being broken into and tools are being systematically stolen. Yet, police are advising them against filing formal reports to avoid insurance complications. Local economies in these impacted districts are visibly stalling as local residents begin to actively avoid areas that have become dominated by new, aggressive security perimeters. The government had promised the bases would bring local trade, but the reality is a closed-loop welfare system where outside contractors extract all the profit. The tax-paying citizens are essentially funding their own economic exclusion. Rural healthcare is facing an identical, critical fracture. While villagers wait weeks for a simple GP appointment, the base residents are provided with dedicated, on-site medical teams, paid for by the state. It is a parallel, two-tier welfare system operating behind barbed wire, prioritizing new arrivals over the tax-paying locals. Policing resources have been quietly and massively diverted from established town centers to perimeter patrols to manage the static migrant population. Officers privately admit that their primary directive has shifted entirely from community safety to asset protection. This leaves outlying farms and business owners exposed to conventional crime with significantly slower response times. The political geography of these sites is equally damning to analysts. Every major location selected sits within a constituency that traditionally votes against Labour. This undeniably fuels the accusation that the entire policy is a targeted, surgical mechanism to destabilize opposition heartlands. It is demographic engineering masquerading as crisis management. The warning is clear, and the symbolism is impossible to ignore. The barracks that once housed the nation's defenders are now closed to homeless British veterans. The military covenant, the solemn promise to those who serve, has been effectively voided by administrative decree. The psychological toll on these communities is becoming a quiet epidemic. Residents who have lived in open, high-trust villages for generations are now installing commercial CCTV systems and aggressive security lighting. The era of leaving the back door unlocked is unequivocally over, ended not by local crime waves, but by a deliberate act of government policy. Tourism, the financial lifeblood of many rural districts, is evaporating before their eyes. Families are cancelling holidays to regions now permanently associated with security zones and social unrest. The government promised compensation for local businesses, but shop owners say the funds are inaccessible or non-existent. It is a managed decline of the rural economy. Strategically, this move signals a total abandonment of effective border control. You do not build semi-permanent housing infrastructure for thousands of people if you genuinely intend to stop the small boats. You build it because you have accepted they are here to stay. These military bases are the physical, concrete admission of defeat. They have created a visible hierarchy of care where the long-suffering citizen soldier now ranks definitively below the illegal arrival.